Peter Dutton said something very telling, I thought, the other day. He said that there was peace on October the 6th. That's palpable nonsense. The fact is that 2023 was, on the West Bank, the most violent year since 2005. Hundreds of Palestinians were killed, 80 children were killed on the West Bank in 2023. So it was a lethal year. There was no peace on October the 6th. So on one level, it's nonsense, as I said, but on another level, on the crude level of power and of the political and media class, the fact is that all those Palestinians dying wasn't news. That didn't disturb the surface of the water. Hamas understood, for better or worse, what would create a disturbance, what would disturb the surface, and that was the death of large numbers of Israelis, and so that's what they did. They did something that couldn't be ignored, because the deaths of Israelis count, and the deaths of Arabs don't count. And they upended Israeli assumptions about the idea that the conflict could be managed. They certainly created a situation where the Palestinians and their situation couldn't be ignored.
For 6 months, ends up becoming the place where Yahya Sinwar is. He's meeting with commanders. He's in a tactical vest. He's got weapons. We'll get more into that. But let's show the footage that everybody has seen at this point. The Israelis released this footage of this drone entering the building that had already been tank shelled. And looking around, if you look dead center, you can see sitting in the chair, which is symbolic already because Yahya Sinwar sat in a chair in his demolished house in 2021, and that became an iconic picture. You can look at him here with his arm tourniquet because the bottom half of his arm has been blown off. You can see he's got his face covered with a makeshift keffiyeh, and you can see he's holding a stick. And he's going to pick this stick up and throw it at the drone that's hovering here. The Israelis are in with the drone because when they came with their force, Sinwar threw 2 grenades at them and they ran away. They broke contact is the military term. Broke contact. To tell you that in lay terms, they ran away. They have no interest in fighting in any kind of face-to-face combat, even with somebody who's been just hit by a tank shell. So they break contact, they go back to their outpost 150 meters away, and they fly this drone to see if where the person in the building is. And they see this person, they have no idea who they're looking at here. The reason why the training brigade, in the army for 9 months, a platoon commander's training school, is going here with a drone from that outpost. They have no idea who they're killing here. And when they see Sinwar throw the stick at them, they do what Israel does. They called in a tank shell and fired a tank shell and dropped the house on top of Sinwar. That happened at 3 o'clock, and they first see him. I'll just go through the whole story. At 10 a.m. on the day before his death was announced. His death was announced on the 17th. He was killed on the 16th in the middle of the afternoon. At 10 a.m. in the morning, from their outpost, flying drones, this training unit sees movement. They don't see fighters, they see movement. And because Rafah is supposed to be depopulated, flattened, their genocidal army sees people moving and immediately fires tank shells at them. That's how Israel behaves. They bury the building and they move on with their day. That's what they did in this case too. They buried Sinwar in the building, they dropped the roof on top of him, and they went back to the base in the middle of the afternoon. Never filed a report, never told the Shabak that they killed maybe a senior leader or even bothered to find out who that leader is, which is something that fits with Israeli tactics throughout this war. They don't do battle damage assessments, but they happen to do a battle damage assessment. A sensitive site exploitation is how other militaries call it. Basically where you go back to the target that you hit and you see who you killed and you attempt to get intelligence from that strike. And Israel doesn't do that. And that's why every single commander that they say they killed, they offer no evidence for it at all, including, by the way, the commander of the Tel Sultan battalion that was with Yahya Sinwar, Mahmoud Hamdan. Israel told us they killed Mahmoud Hamdan in September. They didn't do a battle damage assessment. They didn't go and look. They just tell you, yeah, we killed this person. We killed Mohammed Dave. We killed Marwan Issa. There's no proof of that. Qassam has not acknowledged their deaths. Qassam has acknowledged the deaths of leading figures. And so this story is just remarkable. It's a complete accident that it's Sinwar. It's the likelihood of this attack just dropping the building on him and him becoming one of the 12 or 13,000 people that are buried in rubble that nobody can get out from the rubble because Israel doesn't allow heavy machinery to operate. They blow it all up, as we've seen. That's why people are digging with their hands to try to get people out. So the extreme unlikelihood of Israel actually finding Sinwar, and you can see him there in that freeze frame. He's sitting upright in his chair. He's got his arm tourniquet. He's sitting defiantly in the chair with his face covered. He's in a tactical vest. He's holding weapons. He's holding grenades, which he threw at the force. He's holding an AK-47, and he's holding a Glock pistol. And the Glock pistol that he's holding is the Glock pistol that was captured by Qassam and presented to Sinwar in 2018 during a very consequential foiled Qassam raid, Seret Maktal raid, Israeli Special Forces raid that was attempting a clandestine operation to penetrate Gaza and to plant listening devices to try to get into the closed network that Qassam, under Sinwar's leadership, perfected to have a closed network that the Israelis can't get intelligence, not like Hezbollah, where Israel announced the names of the Hezbollah commanders and Hezbollah confirms the names. We don't have any confirmation of any senior commanders except for two. Ayman Nofel, who is the Central Middle Camps commander, division commander, and Ahmed Gandour, who was the Northern Division commander. Those are the only two confirmed kills in battle that Israel has had and that Qassam has claimed. They claimed the Sinwar death the next day, but this is happening in the middle of the afternoon, the day before Israel announces it. And it's just the fact that it's an accident, the fact that it's not, that it wasn't because of any failing of the resistance. In fact, what you have here is the head of the Politburo, although he's a Qassam Brigade's founder and was the founder of the Majid, the internal security system that Hamas built that became ultimately part of the Qassam Brigades. He's a military man, Sinwar, but he's the Politburo head of Hamas. He's the overall head of Hamas. And we see him in a battle-destroyed area communicating one-on-one with commanders of those battalions. And it opens up so many questions about where Sinwar, who we were told was hiding in a tunnel, surrounded by captives, which we all on this show always said was a lie, because we know that he met with the captives on his first day, on the captives' first day on October 7th. Sinwar went in his perfect Hebrew and spoke to the captives, and he said to the civilians, he said, we'll take care of you. You're in, I promise to take care of you. You're in our hands. You're our guests. You'll go home in the next day or two. That's what Sinwar told the captives after October 7th. And now we see him on the front lines, 150 meters from an Israeli position, communicating with the important battalion commanders, fighting as a soldier. And Israel released this video thinking that they had shown a success, which is just, it's so absurd. I can't help but laugh because the entire world saw this video. And this video is going to be iconic for generations of Palestinian struggle. Sinwar has now set the bar for leadership of the Palestinian national movement so high that you have to fight to the last moment with anything that you have in your hand, with a stick, even when your arm has been blown off. You reach for a stick, you sit up in the chair, upright, in the exact same way as his iconic photo when Israel destroyed his house in 2021. There's just so many elements of this story that are failures for the Israelis, failures for the Americans, who have poured tens of billions of dollars into this war. They have their own American military and intelligence officers embedded within the Israeli, trying to get any kind of signals intelligence, human intelligence, and they failed. They never have any idea where Sinwar is, but Sinwar is communicating. He's doing the ceasefire talks. He's writing letters once he became the overall head of the Politburo after the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh. He's writing letters to the Ansar Allah movement. He's writing letters to Nasrallah and to Hezbollah, and so he is doing everything the Israelis couldn't find him doing, in part because of what Justin said, because he's lived this life of security that puts operational security as the primary concern for a resistance fighter, and he implemented that on the ground for the Palestinians. And the fact that he is holding the gun is captured from one of those Israeli special forces who tried, hidden as Palestinians, dressed up as Palestinians, to come into Gaza and plant listening devices, because Israel knew as far back as 2018 that they did not have a line in on Qassam's communications. They were completely dark. And that is a critical element of the war that we've been watching for the last 385 days, including October 7th, that took Israel by surprise in such a fundamental way that it left them reeling. That was because of operational security that came from Sinwar, that came from prison, where he was a prison leader, and elected. It's an elected job. The prisoners elect Sinwar to be the prison leader, and he teaches. When he came out he was released in the Gilad Shalit prisoner exchange, which was a cross-border operation executed by his brother Mohammed to capture the tank gunner and bring him back into Gaza. During that prisoner exchange, Sinwar said that he didn't want to be part of the prisoner exchange, that he wanted to stay in the prison. He wanted his other comrades to get out before him. That was his disposition. And ultimately that didn't happen because the prisoners said, no, you're going out. And when he got out, the first thing he said was, Israel thought that prison was my grave, but it was my university. And he immediately set about, after 2011, as soon as he arrived in Gaza, he said, I promised everyone that was left behind in prison that we will get them out, that we will free them. And he also makes consistent analogies between Gaza's siege and a prison environment. To liberate Gaza, to break the siege, is a prison break, and that's a term that became commonly used to describe the October 7th operation, was that it was a prison break. And so the connections between those, the fact that he's throwing grenades at Israeli soldiers, that Israeli soldiers run away, send drones, and then follow up with another tank shell that kills him after this still photo I made here of him. They dropped a tank shell and dropped the house and killed him. He was killed as if he was any other fighter. And from the Palestinian side, he was just any other fighter. And that's what made him a leader that will go down in history for what he did. And this video that the Israelis showed, which they believe, it just shows how disconnected they are from all of this, from their genocide, that they believe that this was a win for them, when really you just have every single solitary child in all of Palestine acting this scene out already. You could just imagine it all over Jenin in the north, all the way down, to the internally displaced all over Gaza. The kids see this, and what this does for their morale, to see their leader fighting from the front, advancing from the front. He didn't try to get away. He didn't try to run away. Once he was engaged in contact by the Israelis, he fought. And he fought with a weapon that was captured from an Israeli Special Forces soldier and was presented to Sinwar. You may recognize the gun from some famous speeches of Sinwar when he's speaking on the stage. And the one time in 2011 when he says to Israel, if you want to assassinate me, I'm about to walk home. I'm leaving in 10 minutes, and he stands on the stage and he tucks the gun in his pants with the silencer. That's the gun that was captured in this 2018 foiled raid. That counterintelligence operations of Qassam, of the sort that were in the 1980s Sinwar's job within the movement, before Hamas was Hamas. And as Justin said, when Hamas was seen as being slow to form, Sinwar's in jail in the early to mid 80s. Before Hamas exists, he meets Salah Shahada, who's the founder of the Qassam Brigades. He is a follower of Sheikh Ahmed Yassin. And so he gets the most important portfolio, which is internal security. The Palestinian revolution cannot function if there's collaborators working with the Israelis amid their people. And between the years of him going to jail in the 1980s and the October 7th operation, Palestinians virtually entirely cleared collaborators and made it a non-factor in their resistance. And that's something that Sinwar began. That was a project that began with Sinwar. Ultimately, Sinwar is arrested at the beginning of the first Intifada in 1988. He's actually arrested in Jenin. He's not arrested in Gaza. He's arrested in Jenin, where he's moving through the West Bank, setting up the cells, the underground cells that would become the Qassam Brigades. He's setting up those cells. Israel arrests him for petty, for activism, for throwing stones, for being in demos. They don't arrest him because they think he's the mastermind of setting up the Qassam Brigades. And so he's in prison on small charges. And once the Intifada starts to take shape and the Qassam Brigades start to emerge as underground cells and that rise up from the underground and capture Israeli soldiers in order to exchange them for prisoners who are in Israeli jails, the linchpin of the Palestinian national movement, of the armed struggle, is to capture Israeli soldiers and exchange them for Palestinian prisoners. So once Israel realizes that this has happened, that Qassam has built these underground networks, that's when Sinwar is then retried. He's retried and given multiple life sentences. He's tried for operations that he was said to have planned or that existed even when he was in prison. Israel does that with all the leaders. That's how you have sentences of 17 life sentences. They give the leadership, they take all the numbers of the killed or captured soldiers and they just tack it onto their file. And Sinwar was that way. So even Israel themselves didn't know Sinwar was the man that he was when he was arrested. So that's an interesting fact. And when he's released from prison, as I said, in the Gilad Shalit is captured in 2006. The prisoner exchange is in 2011. He comes out of prison and immediately joins the Hamas Politburo. He becomes effectively the defense minister who's in charge of the Qassam Brigades. And when in 2017 he's elected, all these positions are elected. He's elected in 2017 as the overall head of Hamas in Gaza in 2017, when he's at that point, he is the key bridge between the Hamas movement, the political movement, and the Qassam brigades, the armed wing, which is much more popular than Hamas within Palestinian society, and a natural bridge that he took from defense minister. You know, he didn't come out of prison. First of all, before he came out of prison, Israel said, you all have to sign in the Shalit deal. You all have to sign this paper that says you won't go back to resistance activities. And Sinwar said, no, we're not signing that. And as the leader in the prison, Sinwar said, we're not signing that. And so nobody signed it. And as the prisoner exchange was happening, Israel was really upset about that because they saw it as a big loss that they couldn't get these guys to sign away that they would go into retirement.
We really are the bad guys, and this really is the evil empire. Notes from the edge of the narrative matrix. It takes some learning and insight to understand that Western civilization really is the absolute worst. There can be a kind of hipster, outsider tendency to judge your own society more harshly than you do others, and at first glance it can look like that's what's going on when you see Western critics of the Western Empire denouncing the criminality of their own government and its allies much more harshly than governments like Russia, China, or Iran. It's not until you've done a fair bit of research that you go, wait, okay, no, we actually are quantifiably much more destructive than any other power structure on Earth by an extremely massive margin. We really are the bad guys. We really are the evil empire, and everyone slamming our side as murderous monsters are absolutely correct. Whenever I say this, I get Westerners going, oh yeah, well, I'd much rather live here than over there. Or, well, if it's so bad here, then why don't you go live over there? But the fact that they immediately start babbling about where they'd prefer to live is just a symptom of how sick and twisted this civilization is. They're so cognitively and emotionally divorced from the violence and tyranny their government is inflicting upon the global south that they think the question of which countries are worse than others is a question of how pleasant it would be for them personally to live in. It's like, yes, asshole, it's very nice to be living in the imperial core that's receiving the benefits of mass murder and imperialist extraction, and it's less nice to live in the countries where the murder and extraction is happening. That's the entire fucking point here. It can be nice to live in the Western world, but the Western world is not nice. Ours is the most savage and thuggish civilization on this planet, and it's not even close. The Democratic Party really does look ready to lose yet another easily winnable election by running yet another awful murderous candidate with awful murderous policies, and then once again blame their loss on everyone in America who is a better person than they are. Always having to search for photos of Israel's destruction of Gaza for my articles really drives home the fact that this didn't start last year. I'm always like, here's one. Wait, this one's from 2008. Wait, here's one. No, this one's from 2014. Oh, hey. Nope, different bombing, 2021. My first encounter with Israelis was when I was backpacking through South America in my 20s, and I remember being shocked by how consistently awful they all were. I guess after their mandatory military service, they tend to go traveling for a bit, and whenever I'd run into them, they were reliably some of the nastiest people I'd ever encountered. They weren't ever nasty to me, though. I am a white Westerner, and I never had a problem with them. They were nasty to the impoverished, brown-skinned people who were hosting us. They were obnoxious and bullying toward local guides. They'd leave the place in a mess, and they were always trying to screw over the locals for a better deal or extra meals or favors. One time they tricked a hostel into putting up a sign in Hebrew for other Israeli backpackers which said ugly things about our hosts. They told the hostel owner it was a great review, which I only know because they were laughing hysterically about it and told me. They consistently treated the people who were looking after us like they were much lesser than us. Their pushiness and entitlement were just unbelievable. It was a very educational experience for me. I knew the Palestinians were being treated unfairly because my father had told me so, but I also had a great love for Jews and Jewish culture. I had visited Auschwitz and Dachau and Anne Frank's house in my travels, and I remember having some romantic ideas about kibbutzim. This was my first time directly encountering the reality that there is something unhealthy about Israeli society. Not Jews or Jewish culture, but Jewish Israelis. Now I see evidence of this on my newsfeed every day, in the IDF soldiers prancing around in the undergarments of dead and displaced Palestinian women, in the AI translations of Hebrew tweets, in the polls which show widespread Israeli approval for the atrocities in Gaza, in Israeli TikTok videos mocking the suffering of the Palestinians, in the Israelis showing up in my comments justifying the worst things in the world in the most depraved ways imaginable. My encounters with Israelis in South America were an early taste of ugly things to come. Everything I glimpsed then, I've been seeing online over the past year. I keep thinking about those obnoxious pricks I met all those years ago, and about how they didn't know at the time that they were giving me very useful information for me to make use of in the future. When Israel supporters tell you to shut up about Gaza until you've been to Israel and met Israelis, just ignore them. Don't go to Israel. You're a Westerner. They'll be nice to you. You can just go to one of the tourist spots in the global south that Israelis like to visit, one with lots of brown-skinned people who've been colonized by the West, and watch how they treat people there. That will show you what Israelis are really like.
Kill them by burning them. Everyone is watching that. Even after they were killed, the fire expanded to the next tents. Even if some people survive this, they will be just without any place to go to. It was not the first time to bomb Al-Aqsa hospital or some tents, but I keep shaking. I don't know. They burned people alive. I don't know. They picked this missile to cause this fire at this time of the night to kill people while they are sleeping. And then these people are waking up, watching their bodies burning, turning into black, and having their last breath in front of the camera. That's what happened. They did this. I know that you will not be able to watch the videos, to watch the pictures, to hear them screaming while they are burning and no one can do anything for them, but the Israeli army did this.
Israelis must be raised to see Palestinians as less than human, as less than animals, as less than vermin. They need to be hated with ferocious intensity. It's evil, but it's also the only way to make Israel work. Otherwise, the idea of a Jewish state that was dropped on top of a pre-existing civilization of non-Jews makes no sense, and would not have the consent of the public. This fantasy that Western liberals have of a fair and gentle Israel without apartheid abuses and endless violence is just that, a fantasy. It has never existed, it will never exist, and it cannot exist, because the idea is inherently self-contradictory. Fantasizing about the idea of a fair and just Israel is like living in the American South during slavery and fantasizing about the possibility of slaves one day being treated kindly and fairly in a liberal utopia where cotton plantation owners are still able to reap immense profits because they don't have to pay their workforce. It cannot happen because it's a contradiction in terms. The thing the plantation owners would be getting necessarily comes at the expense of someone else's human rights. Which is why slave owners all harbored dehumanizing beliefs about people of African descent and taught those beliefs to their children. If you don't believe that people with dark skin are fundamentally different from people with pale skin, then there's no way to reconcile the fact that they're receiving vastly different treatment in your society in a way that makes logical and moral sense. Phrenology and other pseudosciences were geared towards squaring these circles in people's minds. That's all we're looking at when we see the seething hatred that Israelis have toward Palestinians. That's why we see Israeli soldiers playing with the toys of dead Palestinian children and dressing in the undergarments of dead Palestinian women in gleeful mockery. That's why Israelis made TikTok videos making fun of Palestinians being slaughtered in Gaza. It's why clicking translate on a social media post made in Hebrew is often like reading a page out of Mein Kampf. This is simply what it looks like when you construct a society around fundamentally unjust principles. And what's really creepy is that we see that same dehumanization here in the West. It's to a lesser extent because our involvement in the crime is less intimate, but we see the dehumanization of Palestinians all around us, in the way Palestinian deaths are treated very differently by the Western political media class than Israeli deaths. Palestinian deaths are a statistic, while Israeli deaths are personal. Palestinians die in numbers, while Israelis die with names. Palestinians die in a terrible humanitarian disaster of unspecified nature, while Israelis are butchered in a sadistic act of terrorism. Palestinians perish in Israel's war of self-defense, while Israelis are killed by monsters who hate Jews. And the reason for the dehumanization of Palestinians in the West is the same as the reason for the dehumanization of Palestinians in Palestine, because otherwise our society doesn't make sense. If Palestinians are just as human as we are, then it doesn't make sense for our governments to be backing mass atrocities we would never accept in our own neighborhoods. There needs to be something less than about them, something unworthy. The abuses of the Western Empire are constructed around this kind of dehumanization, because the empire is held together by mass military violence and abuse inflicted upon populations in the global South. Without all this war, militarism, and imperialist extraction, the giant globe-spanning power structure that's centralized around Washington cannot exist. So, a highly sophisticated propaganda machine has been put together to explain why all this killing, abuse, and exploitation is actually fine and normal, in the same way phrenology was used to justify slavery before abolition in the United States, and in the same way Zionist indoctrination is used in apartheid Israel. A civilization that is premised upon injustice depends upon unjust worldviews. It's true in Israel, and it's true throughout the Western Empire.
Sinwar's novel, which is basically his own autobiography, you're not allowed to buy it on Amazon. You're basically not allowed to purchase it anywhere in the US. The only way to get it is either on a PDF or I got it from a South African publisher. I wonder what would happen if someone tried to publish it and get it in a book in the US, considering there were basically riots at a bookstore in Santa Monica over Helena Cobbin's new compilation called Understanding Hamas, which is just a series of essays and interviews. These books are basically banned nationally, and it will really show you, I've been reading it, who he was, and that he didn't love death or welcome death or war. And it's really a tender recollection. It begins as a tender recollection of life growing up in a refugee camp in Gaza, and how Israel stole his dreams and his family's dreams and crushed life all around him, leaving him with no other choice than to resist. It also tells the story of the rise of Hamas alongside other factions. It's amazing how just the poverty of the U.S. media and the think tanks and all the analysts in their failure to convey what he really believed. And it's almost like they don't want to know. So they don't want you. This is a banned book, so I believe in reading banned books. It's called The Thorn in the Carnation by Yahya Sinwar. You can find it online somewhere.
In terms of his views, he expressed a vision for the future that was in line with what other Hamas leaders said, including Ismail Haniyeh, where he talked about a long-term truce with Israel. He talked about accepting a Palestinian state within the 1967 borders, which is for Palestinians a massive compromise. That's just 22% of what Israel stole from them. And he talked about, of course, insisting on the right of return for refugees, which they have. It's internationally recognized right. And if Israel and the U.S. were actually interested in peace, they could have engaged with that. They could have engaged with the fact that Hamas leaders like Sinwar and Haniyeh were talking about accepting what the U.S. claims to support, which is a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza. But they didn't, because they'd rather prioritize Israeli supremacy and its theft of as much West Bank land as Israel wants, while keeping Gaza in a cage. And you can find that in his past statements. And those statements, I think, presented a real opening that Israel and the U.S. simply just were not interested in pursuing. And so here we are today. His own legacy, I think, Palestinians can judge his contributions to the cause. My own opinion, sitting far away, doesn't really matter. What matters is what Palestinians think. And certainly what's just undisputed, no matter what you think about October 7th, what's undisputably true is that the Hamas leadership did put out overtures to the U.S. and Israel that were ignored and that
rejected, and they were placed under siege and punished and attacked many, many times since the siege was imposed. And large swaths of Gaza were destroyed well before October 7th. So, the theory of October 7th of Al-Aqsa flood was he got himself out of prison along with 1,200 other Palestinians through the taking prisoner of an Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit. One soldier for 1,200 Palestinians. All diplomatic ties have been cut off. They have been placed under siege. So let's get more hostages and prisoners of war on October 7th and create a diplomatic opening. And we can see that Israel had a different idea. It has unlimited bombs and weapons with which to ethnically cleanse Palestinians and expand the conflict into Lebanon, preventing any pressure from a ceasefire from affecting their calculus, which is to destroy the Palestinian nation. That's what they've been aiming at. The U.S. has been playing the role as their lawyer and arms dealer. And so after his death, as Blinken and Kamala say, there's now an opening for peace, the war escalates, because the real obstacle to peace has always been Netanyahu and Israel and the U.S. itself. This was someone who was seeking peace, but on just terms that would set the basis for Palestinian sovereignty, and that was unacceptable, so he had to be killed.
I definitely agree with that. And what they mean, by the way, is this is an opening for peace. This is an opening to put Gaza, or what's left of Gaza, under a U.S.-backed, Gulf-backed dictatorship. Basically, that's what they mean.
So that is what is taking place. Great point. That is what is taking place now in Jabalia, one of the northernmost points in Gaza, along with Beit Lahia. The refugee camp is under Israeli siege, and they're trying to push everyone out according to the general's plan, which has been conceived by Brigadier General Giora Eiland, who is the ideologue of this war. He's sort of the person, along with his hardline former generals, who have been pushing for an ethnic cleansing plan in the north, removing all the population, creating a buffer zone. Then it'll be filled with bases and maybe settlers. It's very likely they'll try to, if they fulfill their plan, Jews-only settlements will return to Gaza, which then necessitate the constant presence of tens of thousands of Israeli soldiers at all times.
The IDF didn't just target hospitals, they destroyed individual medical machines. Notes from the edge of the narrative matrix. Doctors Without Borders emergency coordinator Carolyn Seguin reports that life-saving medical equipment inside the hospitals in northern Gaza has been methodically destroyed, quote, smashed to pieces one by one to make sure no medical care could be provided anymore, end quote. Seguin writes, you have to ask, what is the motivation for such action? These machines are made to save people's lives, mothers, fathers, children. But we all know the motivation. The motivation is to make the Gaza Strip unlivable for Palestinians. What excuses could the Israel apologists possibly produce for this one? Were Hamas hiding in the ventilators? Were the MRI machines being used as human shields? Was there a weapons stockpile in the defibrillator? Was the incubator moving in ways that made IDF troops feel unsafe? What's the Hospira line on this one exactly? Doesn't look like there is one. After all the lies about Israel's actions for systematically destroying Gaza's healthcare facilities, they've now dropped all pretenses and are openly targeting medical equipment itself for destruction. The goal was always to make the Gaza Strip uninhabitable to facilitate the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. Those who say fuck anyone who didn't vote for Kamala because of this or that ugly domestic policy Trump advances simply ignored Gaza during the Biden administration. They ignored it with their eyes, their minds, and their hearts. They avoided looking at the gruesome video footage of dismembered children and burning bodies. They avoided thinking about the daily massacres and imagining what it would be like if it was their own neighborhood being incinerated. They avoided feeling the unpleasant feelings you will necessarily experience if you allow your eyes and your mind to behold these things with unwavering attention. They've been living in a different universe than those of us who've been looking at these horrors and contemplating them and feeling them. That's the one and only reason they can say fuck anyone who didn't vote for Kamala. If they hadn't spent more than a year keeping their eyes, minds, and hearts tightly screwed shut, it would never occur to them to say such a thing. An important point that's getting lost in the conversation about the Trump administration's recent Ukraine moves is that polling now shows a majority of Ukrainians want the war to end. They don't want to fight anymore. That should be the end of the conversation right there. There's nothing left to debate. The very last argument the proxy warriors had, the Ukrainians want to keep fighting, died months ago. If you still want this proxy war to continue even after the Ukrainians themselves want it to stop, then you're a monster. You want Ukrainians to keep throwing their lives into the wood chipper of an unwinnable war against their will, just so you can feel nice feelings instead of uncomfortable feelings. You're a psycho. Everyone should ignore everything you have to say about the world. The Trump administration has frozen funding for the National Endowment for Democracy, a CIA front which facilitates U.S. regime change operations around the world. This follows the stripping of U.S. aid, another U.S. soft power operation. It remains to be seen how much of this is a lasting policy shift, and how much is just a restructuring of the imperial manipulation machine. I was excited to flaunt my told you so's at all the Empire simps on social media who've been calling me a Russian propaganda for saying Ukraine is an unwinnable proxy war that should never have been started. Then I realized most of them are probably offline, now that they're not getting paid. I'm still getting dopey Trumpists telling me that their president is making heroic efforts to achieve peace between Israelis and Palestinians in ways no other president has. Yeah, dipshit, he's doing it by giving Israel literally everything it's ever wanted by removing the Palestinians. That's not solving a problem or achieving peace. That's just using force to declare a winner and taking everything from the declared loser. It's like saying you resolved an argument by murdering one of the participants. It's like saying you can fix racism by eliminating everyone of a different race. Trump's whole plan is, no more Palestinians means no more Israel-Palestine conflict. How stupid do you have to be to believe that's what peace and justice looks like? You can end any dispute by eliminating the other side, but that doesn't equal peace. In this case, it equals giving a genocidal ethno-state everything it's ever wanted, which advocates of peace and justice have spent generations trying to stop. For an entire decade now, American consciousness has been plagued by the delusion that fighting the power has something to do with Donald Trump. Democrats act like they're being brave revolutionaries by standing against him. Republicans act like they're being brave revolutionaries by supporting him. In reality, the fight against real power has almost nothing to do with Donald Trump. It's got very little to do with opposing him, since the US president is just a figurehead, and if it wasn't Trump standing in that position, it'd be some other ideologically identical empire goon. And it's certainly got nothing to do with supporting him, since he's completely unified with the establishment power structures. Progressives view Trump as a Hitlerian dictator who plans to end democracy in America, while rightists view him as a heroic populist who is leading a charge to dismantle the deep state. In reality, Trump's record has established beyond a doubt that he is nothing other than a standard shitty Republican president. As far as his material policy decisions and governance are concerned, he is not extraordinary, and he is not special. His few superficial differences from his predecessors are eclipsed by his similarities with them, which dwarf the differences by orders of magnitude. The only reason Trump is regarded as an aberration rather than a continuation of US status quo politics is because both sides of the imaginary partisan divide keep fueling that delusion with baseless, emotion-driven narratives. The network of plutocrats and empire managers who really run America have been in power since long before Trump, and could easily run things today without Trump, and will continue to run things after Trump. For the previous 4 years, the United States had a president who was an actual dementia patient, and it made no difference to the functioning of the empire. Trump is the same. Anyone could be sitting in that figurehead position, and the tyranny and abuses of the US empire would continue, uninterrupted. To meaningfully oppose real power is not to take some special stance toward Donald Trump, or any other individual empire manager for that matter. The abuses of the empire aren't the product of any one individual, but rather the inevitable fruits of the systems and practices that the empire is premised upon. Capitalism, imperialism.
In Jenin refugee camp, to what the Israeli military dubs as the wasp's nest, we have seen a rise of Palestinian armed youth groups starting within 2021 until today. And these are small battalions. These are youth that grew up in the camps. Many of them have been imprisoned by Israel under administrative detention, meaning no trial, no charge, only torture. And they decided to take up arms, essentially, because they found that across the last decade, any efforts of Palestinians, whether it is in negotiations or whether it is in unarmed and non-violent confrontation, has only allowed Israel to continue its expansion of settlements on Palestinian lands and continue its escalation of violence on Palestinians. So they see themselves as the force that is trying to push back. Even though they're limited in resources, they are protecting their homes.
Don't talk about politics at the dinner table. Everything was going fine until Grandma brought out the roast Palestinian child for dinner. "Who's hungry?" she chirped, a small honey-glazed human corpse on a platter in her arms. "I am," said Grandpa. "Oh boy," said Tommy. "Oh my God, what the fucking fuck?" Susan shrieked. "Jesus, Sue, my ears," said Helen. "What's wrong, honey?" Grandma asked, frozen in shock. "That's a dead kid. Why the fuck is there a dead kid on that plate?" Susan yelled. "Hey, you can't talk to your grandmother like that," Grandpa warned. "Yes, Sue, watch your mouth," said Stanley, covering his daughter's ears. Oh my God, it's a dead kid. Why is everyone acting like this is fine? What the fuck is happening?" "Oh, Susan, sweetie, are you a vegetarian?" "I'm sorry, I didn't know," said Grandma. Did you kill this kid?" Susan asked, struggling to catch her breath. "Oh, Christ, no," said Grandpa. "Is that what this is about?" "No, it's some Arab kid that got killed in that Israeli war. They started selling them by the pound at Costco last month." "You mean the genocide in Gaza?" Susan bellowed, falling to her knees and sobbing. "Ugh, here we go," Tommy sighed. "Can we please not get all political at the dinner table?" said Stanley. "Yeah, no politics," said Grandpa. "We're all here together as a family. Let's just try to have a nice time." "Politics?" Susan screamed. "I'm staring at a dead Palestinian kid right in front of me and it freaks me out. How the fuck is that political?" "I mean, calling it a genocide, Sue," said Ellen. "Look, we can sit here arguing about the war and who started it and whether Israel has a right to defend itself and whether Jews have a right to exist in their homeland, or we can just all take a deep breath and relax and enjoy this delicious meal Grandma spent hours in the kitchen preparing," said Grandpa, reaching for the carving knife. "I swear to God, if any of you so much as touches that kid, I will never speak to you for the rest of my life," said Susan. Oh, for fuck's sake, said Tommy. Tom, said Stanley, putting down the knife to again cover his daughter's ears. God, Sue, why do you always gotta be such a hysterical drama queen, said Ellen. We're just trying to have a nice meal together and you gotta come in playing woke police on everyone. It's a victim of genocide. You want to eat a human child who was killed in a genocide, screamed Susan. You say it's a genocide victim, I say it's dinner, said Tommy. But nobody can be right except you, right, Sue? Only Saint Susan gets to decide which opinions are valid. I think we just need to have respect for one another's different political opinions, Susan, said Grandma. We're not all going to agree on everything, and we need to be able to set that aside and get along together. This is a complicated issue. Who's to say who's right? But this isn't political, wailed Susan. How can you guys not see that? There's a dead kid on the dinner table. A dead kid. I think they're right, Aunt Susan, said Morgan, taking off her headphones. I didn't want to say anything, but a lot of the stuff you've been saying online about the war is really problematic and anti-Semitic, and actually kind of borderline fascist adjacent. The kinds of things you've been saying about President Biden and Vice President Harris are going to land Trump back in the White House. All right. What did we just say about politics at the dinner table, said Grandpa. This is what it leads to. A bunch of hurtful words and hurt feelings. Fuck your feelings, said Susan.
And here we are all these years later, more than a year into the US and Israel's unflinching and ongoing televised genocide in Gaza and now Lebanon in defense of a colonial occupation and an apartheid state. Like every state that has carried out ethnic cleansing and genocide in history, Zionists in Israel, who believe themselves to be the chosen people, began by dehumanizing Palestinians before driving them off their land and murdering them. Prime Minister Menachem Begin called Palestinians two-legged beasts. Yitzhak Rabin called them grasshoppers who could be crushed. And Golda Meir said there was no such thing as Palestinians. Once those two-legged beasts, grasshoppers, dogs, and non-existent people were murdered, ethnically cleansed and ghettoized, a new country was born, no matter what crimes it committed. It grew up like a protected child in a wealthy home whose parents smile proudly as it commits atrocity upon atrocity. No wonder today it feels free to boast openly about committing genocide. No wonder Israeli soldiers seem to have lost all sense of decency. No wonder they flood the social media with depraved videos. Who are these people? What can possibly justify what Israel is doing? This is the part where I'm meant to lapse into moral equivalence and condemn Hamas and to condemn the people of Gaza who celebrated the Hamas attack. I do not tell oppressed people how to resist their oppression or who their allies should be. The point is to ask ourselves whether a liberal, secular fighting force can go up against a genocidal war machine. Because when all the powers of the world are arrayed against them, who do they have to turn to but God? I'm aware that Hezbollah and the Iranian regime have vocal detractors in their own countries, some who also languish in jails or who have faced far worse outcomes. I'm aware that some of their actions constitute war crimes. However, there cannot be an equivalence between this and what Israel and the United States are doing in Gaza, in the West Bank, and now in Lebanon. I ask you, which of us sitting in this hall would willingly submit to the indignity that Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank have been subjected to for decades? What peaceful means have the Palestinian people not tried? What compromise have they not accepted, other than the one that requires them to crawl on their knees and eat dirt? Israel is not fighting a war of self-defense. It is fighting a war to occupy more territory, to strengthen its apartheid apparatus, and tighten its control on Palestinian people and the region. When Benjamin Netanyahu holds up a map of the Middle East in which Palestine has been erased and Israel stretches from the river to the sea, He's applauded as a visionary who's working to realize the dream of a Jewish homeland. But when Palestinians and their supporters chant, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," they are accused of explicitly calling for the genocide of Jews. Are they really? Or is that a sick imagination projecting its own darkness onto others? An imagination that cannot countenance diversity, cannot countenance the idea of living in a country alongside other people, equally with equal rights.
Let's start with Barack Obama, because he definitely knows better. Definitely knows better. This is him here in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He has some words for the people who don't want to support Kamala Harris because of the genocide.
If you're a Christian and you care deeply about the abortion issue, I understand that, but does that mean you'll support somebody who seems to violate pretty much every precept of the Ten Commandments? If you are a service member and you're somewhat conservative and you're used to voting Republican, I can understand it, but somebody who genuinely does not believe in duty and honor and does not understand why anybody would sacrifice themselves on behalf of their country, why would you do that? If you're a Muslim American and you're upset about what's happening in the Middle East, why would you put your faith in somebody who passed a Muslim ban and repeatedly suggested that somehow you weren't part of our American community?
So here's the thing, and I told you guys, like, I don't understand the Muslim voters that decided to vote for Donald Trump. That is not the direction that I think that you should take. But I would imagine, again, those particular voters may be a little bit more conservative anyway. But what Barack Obama fails to mention is the fact that a lot of Muslim voters are supporting Jill Stein, not Donald Trump. And you really can't, how can I say this politely? You really can't go to the Muslim community and try to shame them into supporting the same administration that is actively killing their people. Like, you can't, you really can't, right? And I feel like Barack Obama, he knows better, because he actually used to be really good on Palestine. A lot of people may not realize this. Barack Obama was good on Palestine until AIPAC got a hold of him. He actually was pro-Palestinian before AIPAC got to him. He understood the Palestinian cause and agreed with the Palestinian cause. But once AIPAC got a hold of him, Barack Obama changed his message. So you can't, this is a bad strategy. Like, you cannot say to these people, well, how dare you vote for, and I get it. I don't understand why people would want to support Trump either. But that particular community, you can't guilt trip them for not supporting the administration that is killing their people, starving their people. No food has entered Gaza since October 1st. So you can't do that to those people. Last night, I asked this question to Mark Lamont Hill, and I said, if somebody killed your family, would you vote for them? If somebody killed your family and they're running for office, would you vote for them? Because I know that I wouldn't. And you can't make those people feel guilty for not wanting to do that. They're standing on principle. That's more than I can say for some of us, right? So a bad strategy here.
If you're an African American or Latino, if you're from Puerto Rico and you see somebody whose values seem to indicate that you're not part of their equation, how do you think it's okay? How can you tell yourself it's okay as long as our side wins?
Well, we can say the same thing about Joe Biden, Barack Obama. We could say the same thing considering some of the comments and legislation that he passed against African Americans. We can say the same thing. And it's one thing, and this is something I want people to understand. Like, I don't agree with these comments, but it's one thing to make a comment. It's another thing to actively create legislation that hurts and harms that community. So Joe Biden's crime bills, this is what a lot of people don't realize. There are a number of us in the Black community that know people that were directly impacted by Joe Biden's crime bills over weed. It's a plant. So these are the things that sometimes people don't think about. But Barack Obama, he knows better. But people can say that same thing about him. And you told people to come out and support Joe Biden, right? So I told you Obama knows better, and you'll see that he knows better. Now, here's Obama. This is what he said about Palestinians years ago. See, video lives on forever, fam.
Right to self-determination, their right to justice, must also be recognized. And put yourself in their shoes. Look at the world through their eyes. It is not fair that a Palestinian child cannot grow up in a state of their own. Living their entire lives with the presence of a foreign army that controls the movements, not just of those young people, but their parents, their grandparents, every single day. It's not just when settler violence against Palestinians goes unpunished. It's not right to prevent Palestinians from farming their lands or restricting a student's ability to move around the West Bank or displace Palestinian families from their homes. Neither occupation nor expulsion is the answer. Just as Israelis built a state in their homeland, Palestinians have a right to be a free people in their own land.
See the difference? He knows a lot about Israel. He knows about Gaza. Again, like I said, Barack Obama knows exactly what was happening to those people. And as much as people want to bring up the genocide in Gaza, this is Obama here talking about the West Bank also. So when people say, when Kamala Harris says we got to get the hostages back, we got to bring the hostages home, she's limiting Palestinian suffering to Gaza. And she's not talking about the West Bank. That's on purpose, because when they start to talk about the West Bank, then it's kind of hard to say Israel has a right to defend herself, right? Because Hamas is not in the West Bank. Many of you are probably wondering what happened to Barack Obama. There's even this part here. People may not remember this. Obama had strong words on Israel and Palestine at his last press conference. Too little, too late.
Every day, it's just a competition back and forth from both parties and their surrogates to see who can be more offensive in their support for genocide. Like, one day it's Rudy Giuliani saying some bigoted stuff in Madison Square Garden. Next day it's Bill Clinton saying something repellent in Michigan. In fact, that's the theme of today's 4 basic food groups. We're going to hear from both of these gentlemen. So let's kick it off with Democrats Suck.
Okay, so for Democrats Suck, let's take a look at what Bill Clinton had to say at a rally ostensibly for Kamala Harris in Michigan. I don't understand how he thought that this would be helpful to her, but you guys can be the judge.
I understand why young Palestinian and Arab Americans in Michigan think too many people have died. I get that. But if you lived in one of those kibbutzim.
No, he didn't say kibbutzes. He was trying to say kibbutzim, by the way, in case you missed that. Okay.
Kibbutzes.
In Israel, right next to Gaza, where the people there were the most pro-friendship with Palestine, most pro-two-state solution of any of the Israeli communities were the ones right next to Gaza. And Hamas butchered them. And so then the people who criticize it are essentially saying, yeah, but look how many people you killed in retelling. So how many is enough for you to kill to punish them for the terrible things they did? That all sounds nice until you realize, what would you do if it was your family and you hadn't done anything but support a homeland for the Palestinians, and one day they come for you?
Okay, so this is just insane. He's saying that because some Palestinian militants broke out of their concentration camp, because Gaza is occupied by Israel, which he's omitting, that gives Israel the right to slaughter tens of thousands of Palestinians, because some of the Israeli victims on October 7th lived in areas that were pro-peace.
Right.
I mean, it's just completely deranged. There's no like revenge exception in international law. Like, you don't get to slaughter a bunch of civilians because some of your own civilians were killed by an occupied population, and some of your own people happen to support peace. And by the way, he's omitting that there were Israeli soldiers who were killed on October 7th. And also he's omitting the fact we don't know how many people Israel killed on October 7th, because that's been covered up, but we do know they killed at least some of their own people by the Hannibal directive. But anyway, all that's details. The principle here is like, what is he talking about?
Yeah, and it also just shows like the imagine if we're your family. I mean, he has no empathy for Palestinian families. Why doesn't he imagine it was his family who's been wiped out? Like, he just has humanity he sees the humanity of Israelis, but not Palestinians.
Yeah, and if you're going to make that argument, you have the right to use violence against civilians because something that happens to your family, then honestly, the only people who can make that argument are Palestinians.
Yeah.
Because they've been occupied and ethnically cleansed for decades. I'm actually not making that argument. I don't think anybody has the right to commit violence against civilians, no matter what happens to their own civilians. I don't believe, that's terrorism. I don't believe in it. But if anybody has an argument to make, it's Palestinians, because they're the ones who are militarily occupied. And what gets obscured in all this is that, I don't think Hamas set out to kill civilians on October 7th. Some of their people did, and some Palestinian militants did. But the operation was clearly an attempt to attack the Israeli military and to take captive Israeli soldiers so they could exchange them for Palestinians that are being held hostage inside Israeli prisons. So, but anyway, all that's obscure in the details. But so what is Bill Clinton saying here? He thinks he's going to go to Michigan, where you have tens of thousands of people who are upset about genocide. And he's saying, get over it because some pro-peace Israelis were killed on October 7th. It's so offensive. And then, in fact, it gets even more offensive.
Slaughter the people in your village. You would say, well, you'll have to forgive me. I'm not keeping score that way. It isn't how many we've had to kill. Because Hamas makes sure that they're shielded by civilians. They'll force you to kill civilians if you want to defend yourself.
Poor Israel. I mean, it is a victim of Hamas's human shielding. But for this human shielding, which, by the way, according to Amnesty International, they documented lots of examples of Israel using human shields, and they did not document cases of Hamas using human shields. But I love the argument that, let's say for argument's sake that they did do that, okay? Just for argument's sake. I love the idea that, but for that, Israel would be really careful with civilians.
Yeah, and what's also obscured here is that the people of Gaza have nowhere to go. They're trapped in a death camp, right? So it's like, by definition, they're going to be near Hamas because nobody can leave. They're in a very small strip of land, more than 2 million people. And it's actually even more confined because Israel's ordered people to flee their homes, so they're even more concentrated than they were before October 7th. So it's Israel that forces humans to be victims because they won't let them leave.
Right.
It's worse than using people as a human shield. It's keeping people inside a death camp on purpose.
Right, and
Bill
they're
Clinton,
pretending that they're being used as human shields.
yeah, it's just so unbelievably cynical. But look, it gets even worse, and we have to hear more of this because this is who the Democrats are. Bill Clinton goes on to make essentially a messianic biblical argument that there were some Jews in Palestine 2,000 years ago, so therefore, sorry Palestinians, you have to get mass murdered.
Hamas did not care about a homeland for the Palestinians. They wanted to kill Israelis and make Israel uninhabitable. Well, I got news for them. They were there first. Before there was, their faith existed. They were there. In the time of King David, in the southernmost tribes had Judea and Samaria.
So now he's just making a straight up like Jewish Christian fundamentalist argument that because according to the Bible there were some Jewish tribes in Judea and Samaria, which is the West Bank, therefore now 2,000 years later European Jews have the right to come over and steal all Palestinian land, commit ethnic cleansing, and now commit mass murder to maintain their stronghold over the land they stole. I mean, yes, there were Jews in Palestine 2,000 years ago. There also were Christians and Muslims. Does that give anyone the right to then say that they have the divine right to all the land and commit mass murder and ethnic cleansing? Bill Clinton is saying yes, that's what he's saying. This is like straight up religious fundamentalism. And he's a top surrogate right now for Kamala Harris in a state that they need to win and where there's a lot of Muslim and Arab American voters. Like, are they trying to lose? That's the question you have to ask yourself.
Yeah.
Are you trying to lose?
I think maybe the Clintons are really upset that Hillary Clinton didn't get to be the first female president, and they don't want Kamala to get to be it either.
That's quite plausible. Honestly, how else do you explain this behavior?
Like, yeah, I mean, besides the fact that it's a disgusting worldview, like, isn't Bill Clinton smart enough to read the room? Like, it's a disgusting argument, but doesn't he know that it won't be convincing to people who care about Palestinians?
I mean, yeah, listen, there are many theories that could explain this behavior. I think yours is quite plausible, that the Clintons are just trying to, like, go scorched earth and not allow Kamala to be the first female president. Another theory is that, like, the Israelis have so much compromise on Bill Clinton, you know, and the guy does have a long track record of, you know, compromise-worthy behavior. That maybe this is why he's doing it. I don't know, but it's like, or they're just so fanatically devoted to Israel and Israeli occupation that they're just willing to go into, you know, a swing state with a lot of Arab Americans, a lot of people who oppose genocide and offend them. Who knows? But whatever it is, it's not helping their chances. There's another personal aspect for this when it comes to Bill Clinton, which is that he's been on a 24-year PR campaign of lying about Palestinians and blaming them for the collapse of the so-called peace process. He claimed falsely that Arafat rejected a really generous peace deal that he helped put together, which is not true. Israeli officials have even said, Shlomo Ben-Ami, the former foreign minister of Israel, said that if I were Palestinian, I would have rejected the offer that Israel put forward with Clinton's backing at Camp David. He literally said that because he knew that the offer, the so-called generous offer that Clinton oversaw from Israel, the Palestinians, denied Palestinians their most basic rights. It kept the major West Bank settlement blocks. It wouldn't meaningfully address the refugee issue. It wanted to take more Palestinian land in the West Bank than it was willing to offer Israeli land in return as compensation. Completely unfair. And Bill Clinton's been lying for 24 years, saying that Palestinians walked away from this really generous deal. So he's been involved in a propaganda campaign to justify Israeli violence against Palestinians. And that's what he's continuing here. And by making these ridiculous biblical claims that nobody except for a religious fanatic takes seriously. So that's Bill Clinton as well. There's a personal thing here, and it's so vile what he's doing. And I think he's playing with fire. They need Michigan to win, and every time he opens up his mouth here, he's just turning off more people who oppose genocide.
What did Dr. Jill Stein, the third-party presidential candidate, say to the public that's backed by law? she talked about how when Charlemagne said, well, why does it seem like you as a third party candidate seems like you're giving more criticism to the Democrats than you are the Republicans? She said, when it comes down to this election, are y'all listening? She said, it's the Democrats that's suing us in court to keep us off the ballot. The headline says Democrats try to block Green Party from presidential ballot in Wisconsin, citing legal issues, right? Well, it says an employee of the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, filed a complaint Wednesday seeking to remove Green Party's presidential candidate from the ballot in Wisconsin, arguing the party is ineligible. It says it's the latest move by the DNC to block third-party candidates from the ballot. Y'all listen. Democrats also seeking to stop independent Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in several states. The Green Party's appearance on the presidential ballot could make a difference in swing state Wisconsin, where 4 of the past 6 presidential elections have been decided between 5,700 votes. That's a very, very razor-thin margin that could determine an election. So a part of the Democrat strategy is to actually prevent pro-reparations candidates from getting on the ballot.
What if I told you everything you've been taught about morality is a lie? That kindness, fairness, and honesty, everything you were told makes you strong, precisely what makes you weak. You've seen it throughout history. Ruthless men rise, kind men fall. The cunning win, the naive lose. But why? Is evil simply stronger than good? Or is there something we refuse to accept about the nature of power? To understand why evil wins, we must turn to Friedrich Nietzsche, one of history's most radical and misunderstood thinkers. Most of us are raised with the comforting belief that good always triumphs over evil, that justice prevails, that if you're honest, kind, and fair, success will follow. It's a beautiful idea. But here's the problem, it's a fairy tale. Nietzsche saw through this lie. He called it slave morality. Slave morality teaches you to be humble, obedient, and self-sacrificing. Why? Because it was created by the weak to control the strong. Think about it. Who benefits when the powerful feel guilty for using their power? Who gains when the strong are taught to hold themselves back? Look at history. The Romans, driven by strength and dominance, built an empire that shaped civilization. But Christianity emerged with a radical new idea that the meek shall inherit the earth, that suffering is virtuous, and that power is sinful. And what happened? The Roman Empire fell, and Christianity conquered hearts and minds. Nietzsche saw this as a masterful trick for the powerless to make the robust feel ashamed of their nature. He wrote everywhere the weak are on the move, seeking to undermine the strong with their morality, to pull them down to their level. Now, here's the part that makes people uncomfortable. Nietzsche didn't believe in good vs evil. He believed in power vs weakness. In nature, does the lion feel guilty for killing the gazelle? Does the wolf apologize for being strong? No. Because nature doesn't reward kindness, it rewards dominance. The same is true in human society. The ones who rise are those who embrace power, not those who deny it. Throughout history, the most substantial figures, the ones who shaped the world, did not follow the rules of morality. They played by the rules of power. Nietzsche called these individuals the Übermensch or Overman, those who rise above conventional morality and create their values. And what about the others? The ones who cling to traditional morality, believing that fairness and virtue alone will protect them. Nietzsche had a name for them too, the last men. The last men are the people who choose comfort over greatness, who fear to struggle, reject ambition, and settle for mediocrity. They tell themselves they are good, but are simply afraid. Nietzsche described them as follows. What is love? What is creation? What is longing? What is a star? Thus asks the last man and blinks. They are the people who would rather be comfortable than powerful, trade freedom for security, shrink from struggle, and call it virtue. This is why good people lose. They don't understand the true nature of power. They believe playing fair will protect them, but power belongs to those who seize it. In the corporate world, is it the kindest person who becomes CEO, or the one who knows how to navigate power? In politics, is it the most honest leader who wins, or the one who knows how to manipulate public perception? But here's where it gets even worse. Not only do good people lose, but they also serve the ones who exploit them. How? Because they allow themselves to be ruled, the meek don't inherit the earth, they work for those who do. But the truth is even darker than you think. It's not just that the robust rise, it's that the weak willingly submit. People don't just tolerate injustice, they crave authority. They surrender to it. They make excuses for the people who exploit them because it's easier than confronting the brutal reality. They don't want freedom, they want safety. This is why history repeats itself. Why do people bow to corrupt leaders, follow blind ideologies, and let others dictate the game's rules? They claim to be moral, but fear taking responsibility for their power. Nietzsche believed that most people deceive themselves about morality. They claim to follow virtue, but in reality, they fear the responsibility of power because power is terrifying. It demands risk, confrontation, and taking control of one's life instead of waiting for fairness to save one. This is why so many people reject Nietzsche's ideas. Accepting them means accepting that there is no divine justice, no moral safety net, and no guarantee that goodness will be rewarded. And that is a terrifying realization. But Nietzsche didn't write for the weak. He wrote for those willing to hear the truth. He said, one must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. In other words, true greatness comes not from avoiding struggle, but from embracing it. And here's where Nietzsche's philosophy becomes truly dangerous. If morality is just a construct and fairness is a myth, what stops the ruthless from taking everything? If the world belongs to the strong, then where does that leave the rest? Are we doomed to be ruled by those without conscience? This moral dilemma weakens most people to fear that power is corrupt. But Nietzsche had a response to this fear. Power alone is not the enemy. It is how you wield it that defines you. The overman doesn't seek power for destruction, he seeks it for creation. He builds, innovates, and dominates not for cruelty, but because to deny power is to deny life itself. So, what's the solution? Does this mean you should abandon morality entirely and become ruthless? Not necessarily. Nietzsche wasn't saying to be evil. He was saying to stop being naive. To recognize that morality is not a shield. That power is not evil, it's a tool. Stop believing that goodness alone will protect you. Strength and strategy matter. Learn to navigate power. The world is not fair. Understand the rules of influence. Create your values. Stop letting society dictate what's right for you. Nietzsche's message isn't that you must be cruel. It's that you must be strong. That you must rise above false morality and claim your power. He challenged us. Behold, I teach you the overman. Man is something that shall be overcome. The question is, are you willing to claim your strength? Or will you let the world rule you? Now you have a choice. You can continue believing the comforting lie that goodness alone is enough. Or you can embrace the hard truth that power shapes the world. Nietzsche's philosophy forces us to confront the fact that we are not entitled to fairness. Morality is often a tool of control, and power is available only to those willing to take it. And that most people will never dare to claim it. So I'll ask you again, are you ready to wake up? Or will you remain asleep?
I'm here to talk about Kendrick Lamar and the Super Bowl concert and this guy Drake, who I knew nothing about until this all erupted. But I've done a little research, so here goes. First, to my fellow white friends who don't understand hip-hop or rap, you need to. It's really just disappointing for me that so many white people want to ignore the rich and full extent of the contributions African Americans have made to what we call America, to what we call the United States. Let's start with cuisine. I grew up in the South. Most of what we consider Southern cuisine, in fact, is African cuisine or modifications to it. The rest of it's mostly Native American, because the only thing the English brought was baking with wheat flour, and wheat doesn't even grow in the Southeast. So that's the first thing, but it's certainly not the last. The porch. An architectural feature on virtually every house in my neighborhood came from Africa. European houses don't have porches. And then let's talk about literature and just the wealth that we take for granted in this country, and all the stuff that was built by people who weren't paid for their labor. So, if you really are a Christian and you really believe in treating everybody with dignity and respect, it behooves you to take some time to study the history and contributions of people who are darker than you in what we call American life. And then that's the lead up to the first rap Super Bowl show, which was when the Super Bowl was here in Los Angeles. And a lot of my friends had a hard time, like, what was that? I said, it was people expressing stuff they never tell to white people they don't trust, which is most white people. It's very frustrating. It really is. And then I looked into this whole Kendrick and Drake feud, and from my take, it seems like Drake is jealous because Kendrick won a Pulitzer Prize, which is like the Oscars of literature. And by the way, Kendrick Lamar is from Compton, which is about 10 miles that way. And Drake is from Canada. And I'm not dissing on Canadians, but it is a different culture. And let's just say, I think it's difficult for a lot of Canadians to really understand our culture here in the United States, especially the variety of it that goes from the Atlantic to the Pacific and the Gulf of Mexico to the Canadian border. But the bottom line is this: we white folks, because we're the majority, never have to really think about any of this stuff for our survival, because we're in the club.
Arthur Schopenhauer did not start a pessimist. He was not born believing that life is a cruel joke, that morality is a tool for the powerful, or that human existence is a battle where only the ruthless win. He learned it through experience, through betrayal, through observation. His journey began like many others, full of ambition, curiosity, and an unshakable belief in reason. But by the time he formulated his masterpiece, The World as Will and Representation, he had become a philosopher of darkness, a thinker who exposed life's brutal, mechanical truth. His conclusion: life is not fair, power is not moral, and those who rise to the top are rarely the best among us. Stay with me, because today we are diving deep into one of the most unsettling truths about human nature. Schopenhauer's philosophy wasn't born in an ivory tower. It came from pain, failure, and seeing the world for what it truly is. He was supposed to be great. Johanna Schopenhauer, his mother, was a renowned author, and his father, a successful merchant, expected him to take over the family business. But from an early age, Schopenhauer saw that the world was not governed by intelligence or justice, but by cunning, social influence, and brute force. His father, whom he admired, saw the world raw and unfiltered, not through idealism, but hard reality. The world is not a rational place, and men are not rational beings, Schopenhauer wrote. His father died under mysterious circumstances, either by suicide or an accident. His mother famous, charming, and socially powerful rejected him. When he finally published his magnum opus, he expected recognition, a place in history, prestige. Instead, silence, because he published his work at the same time that Hegel, a man he despised, was dominating the academic world. Schopenhauer hated Hegel, not just for his ideas, but because he saw Hegel as the embodiment of the fraudulence that the world rewards. Hegel was verbose, overly complex, and obsessed with vague metaphysical theories that Schopenhauer saw as nonsense. Yet Hegel had what Schopenhauer lacked, institutional power. Hegel played the game. He aligned himself with those in control. And Schopenhauer, he refused to bow. He was arrogant, dismissive. He lectured on purpose at the same time as Hegel. The result? His classroom was empty. Hegel won. Not because he was smarter, not because his philosophy was more profound, but because he understood how to gain and maintain power. And Schopenhauer? He was cast aside. His genius was ignored for decades. This experience shaped his entire worldview. Schopenhauer's most significant insight came from his deep study of Eastern philosophy, notably Buddhism and Hinduism. He realized that human nature is not rational. It is biological. We are not moral beings seeking fairness. We are animals driven by an irrational, blind force, what he called the will to life. This will is not noble or compassionate. It is a relentless, selfish, and cruel drive to survive and dominate. Man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills, Schopenhauer wrote. Is everything you think a conscious decision? It's an illusion. You are a puppet of instincts you cannot control. And the people who rise to power, they are the ones who are least burdened by conscience. The good hesitate, the ruthless act. The good questions themselves. The ruthless impose their will. The good want fairness. The ruthless create the rules that ensure they always win. The will to life does not care about justice. It does not care about kindness. It rewards those who dominate, manipulate, and seize power. But why does this system continue to repeat itself? Because the will to life is not only blind, it is deceptive. It does not present itself as brute force alone. It wears masks. It disguises power as virtue, coercion as cooperation, and oppression as necessity. The greatest trick of the will to life is that it convinces even the most ruthless that they are righteous, that their domination is justified, and that their success is the result of merit, not manipulation. This is why the most successful tyrants, corporate overlords, and political despots do not see themselves as villains. They see themselves as inevitable. But this deception doesn't just exist in the powerful, it exists in all of us. Schopenhauer believed that most people do not act out of pure rational thought, but out of deeply ingrained biological impulses. The drive to conquer, control, and accumulate are not rational choices. They are primal urges dressed up as ambition, success, and power. The will to life hides behind ideology. It makes people believe that their victories are moral victories, that their selfishness is justified, and that their exploitation of others is how the world works. This is why history repeats itself. Those who gain power believe they were meant to have it, and those who suffer under them are conditioned to accept their fate. Schopenhauer saw human history as a brutal cycle in which the strong always win, not because they are better, but because they are willing to do what the weak will not. But does this mean that resistance is futile? Schopenhauer did not advocate surrender. He did not say we should embrace the will to live and become ruthless. Instead, he warned us to see the game for what it is, recognizing that the world operates not on fairness but on will, strength, and deception is essential. And if you do not understand this, you will always be at the mercy of those who do. We don't need to take Schopenhauer's word for it. History itself is the proof. Julius Caesar promised the people democracy, then dismantled the republic to make himself ruler for life. Napoleon Bonaparte spoke of liberty, then crowned himself emperor, refusing to kneel before any king but himself. Rockefeller and Carnegie didn't rise through fair competition. They monopolized entire industries, crushed opponents, and rewrote the rules of capitalism in their favor. None of these men were the most moral or intelligent. They were the most strategic, fearless and visionary, seeing the world for what it was, not what they were told it should be. And here's the most unsettling truth. The world did not punish them for it. It rewarded them. Because power is not won by those who deserve it, it is taken by those who understand it. Schopenhauer understood something that most people refuse to accept. People do not follow the good. They follow strength. But this is where the story gets darker. It's not just that bad people rise to power. Society helps them do it. Think about it. Who writes history? Who controls the narratives that shape our understanding of the world? The victors, the rulers, the ones who won the game. Caesar did not just take power, he convinced the masses that he was their savior. Napoleon did not seize France by brute force, he used charisma, propaganda, and fear to make people beg for his rule. Rockefeller wasn't seen as a villain, he was admired, respected, and even idolized for his wealth and success. Why? Because people do not crave fairness, they crave certainty. A leader who appears decisive, powerful, and dominant, even corrupt, will always command a following. A manipulator who understands human nature, who plays on fear, desire, and ambition will always be able to control the masses. And this is the most incredible illusion of all. The people who suffer under power are often the ones who reinforce it the most. Look at history again. The French did not resist Napoleon's rule, they adored him. The Romans did not fight Caesar's dictatorship, they cheered for him. The working class did not rebel against Rockefeller, they bought into the myth of the self-made billionaire. Even in modern times, the masses idolize billionaires, corrupt politicians, and ruthless business leaders, not despite their power, but because of it. They mistake domination for greatness. And this is why the game is rigged. It's not that the goods fail to rise, it's that the world does not want them to. It rewards those who play by a different set of rules. Schopenhauer understood that power has never been about morality, it has always been about perception. And the moment you stop believing that justice will fix this world, you will finally see the truth. So, what do we do with this knowledge? Should we abandon morality and become ruthless ourselves? Schopenhauer did not believe in winning the game. He believed that wisdom lies in seeing through it. A man is wise when he does not suffer over things beyond his control. This is where Schopenhauer's philosophy diverges from Nietzsche, Machiavelli, and the modern obsession with power. Schopenhauer believed that the only true escape from this brutal game is to detach from it, to stop chasing illusions, to stop expecting fairness from the world, to live with clarity rather than delusion. The most significant power, he believed, was in not being ruled by desire at all. Now that you see the truth, you have two choices. You can ignore it. You can continue believing that the world is fair, that morality is the path to success, and that the system is designed to reward the best among us. Or you can wake up. Schopenhauer did not teach power. He taught freedom. Freedom from illusions. Freedom from expectations. Freedom from the lies we were taught. Because once you see through the game, you can never be manipulated again. And those who cannot be ruled are the ones who are genuinely free.
We want to make it very clear that we should not be confused with a generation of cowards who can be bullied by imperial forces and power-hungry individuals intoxicated by the wealth of apartheid. The United States of America has bullied nations before and imposed senseless and arbitrary sanctions and threatened wars. But we are a different generation. We are a generation of economic freedom fighters and will not be bullied, Mr. President. We agree with you, President, that we should not be bullied. We stand on the shoulders of the giants who confronted the establishment with their very lives, and we are willing to follow in their footsteps. We are not cowards, and they must not try us.
Okay, so, listen, you folks have nothing to worry about. You have nothing to worry about. Donald Trump has assured everybody that Social Security is not going to be touched.
Security will not be touched. It'll only be strengthened. We have illegal immigrants on Social Security and come out of California. We're not going to stand for that. So we're going to strengthen our Social Security, etc. We're not going to touch it other than to make it stronger. But we have people that shouldn't be on, and those people we have to weed out. Most of them, or many of them so far, have been illegal immigrants. They shouldn't even be in the country.
All right, so that is very reassuring. So he doesn't want to touch Social Security, except that apparently there's an enormous problem, not a random case here and there. There's an enormous problem of illegal immigrants without the benefit of a Social Security number somehow managing to get Social Security. It's an enormous problem. It's an enormous problem. That is their only concern. Republicans have always been very honest when they express their intentions about Social Security, as we will see. So let's so this article breaks down some of the history of Republicans. This was compiled by the AFL-CIO in regards to Social Security. So let's look at some of the lowlights. 1935, almost all Republicans in Congress opposed the creation of Social Security. 1939, 75% of Republicans in the Senate try to kill legislation providing Social Security benefits to dependents and survivors, as well as retired workers. 1950, 79% of the House and 89% of the Senate Republicans vote against disability insurance to defeat it. 1956, 86% of Republicans in the Senate oppose disability insurance. Let them sell pencils, they called it. The Let them sell pencils act. Program approved nonetheless. 1964, Republican presidential candidate Barry Goldwater and future President Ronald Reagan both suggest that Social Security be made voluntary. Now, I am sure that Barry Goldwater, when he spoke about Social Security, expressed that to potential voters.
Social Security is a contract between the federal government and you. I don't believe in breaking contracts, and I have never at any time advocating doing away with Social Security. Now, what I am concerned about, though, is the fact that you, all of us, paying our money in, paying our dollars into Social Security, when we get to the age to get it back, we're not going to get our dollar back. This is what I'm trying to talk about in Social Security. I'm trying to get the older people and the younger people to realize that if this kind of wasteful expenditure continues in our government, that when it comes time for them to get their Social Security, they're not going to do too well. And I don't think you have to go further than to ask the recipient today of Social Security if they're living very high off the hog, and they're not.
See, Barry Goldwater doesn't want to get rid of Social Security. He's really worried. Donald Trump, I'm sure, is being very honest and forthcoming about his thoughts on Social Security.
Let's lay it to rest once and for all. I told you never would I do such a thing. But I tell you also now, Social Security has nothing to do with the deficit.
Wow.
Social Security is totally funded by the payroll tax levied on employer and employee. If you reduce the outgo of Social Security, that money would not go into the general fund to reduce a deficit. It would go into the Social Security Trust Fund. So Social Security has nothing to do with balancing a budget or erasing or lowering the deficit.
So not only did Ronald Reagan promise he wouldn't cut Social Security, even though by that time he had repeatedly been trying to cut Social Security, he says that it has nothing to do with the deficit, so I guess he was just motivated by pure evil. He's not even saying it has anything to do with the deficit. I'm just an evil bastard. I just don't like the idea of old people eating human food. I want them eating Alpo. So yeah, wow. Okay. All right. So that's what he had to say about Social Security. Very different from his actions behind the scenes. He was obviously so hostile to it that he constantly was trying to make cuts to Social Security in one way or another. In response to a headline, Doge aides search Medicare agency payment systems for fraud. Not the Pentagon. It's Medicare and Medicaid, which are wildly popular and people don't want touched. Us team accesses Medicare, Medicaid records. And this, he just tweeted this out yesterday. At this point, I am At this point, I am 100% certain that the magnitude of the fraud in federal entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, welfare, disability, etc., exceeds the combined sum of every private scam you've ever heard by far. By far, it's not even close. It's more than the Nigerian prince scams, more than any scam you ever heard of. Now, this is an old Republican trick when they want to cut something. They will tell you that somebody's getting something for free. A pioneer in this technique was the Gipper himself with his famous welfare queen formulation, which I just learned researching this. He didn't actually say those words. That was a newspaper invention, welfare queen. But the effect of it was there in his words. Got you lubed up with the U.S. aid and all that, right? That's what this is really all about. They've been trying to do this for 90 years. They've got you just knee-jerk. Yeah, there's waste, there's fraud. How many? Okay, suppose there are immigrants getting Social Security. How many do you think that is? Like, how common a problem do you really think that is?
Of course.
But once they get people screaming, yeah, we got to stop the fraud and waste, now they can do what they've always wanted to do. And you know who warned you that they always wanted to do this? The late, the great George Carlin. 20 years ago this year was this model.
They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right. They don't want people who are smart enough to sit around the kitchen table and figure out how badly they're getting fucked by a system that threw them overboard 30 fucking years ago. They don't want that. You know what they want? They want obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want your fucking retirement money. They want it back so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. And you know something? They'll get it. They'll get it all from you sooner or later because they own this fucking place. It's a big club and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club.
Yep. He was a prophet. He warned you about this 20 years ago. And they've been trying. They've been trying, right? Right after he did that, George Bush made his proposal for privatizing Social Security. He was going to give it to Wall Street. That's what they want to do. Every technique, every tactic, every bit of propaganda they've tried to convince people to get behind cutting Medicare and Social Security has failed. So now they're going welfare queen. Only now it's going to be the immigration queen.
Exactly.
Got all these immigrants who are getting the Social Security, and just like people without even understanding what the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is, all of a sudden they're experts talking about what a terrible organization it was because Humpty Dumpty said so on Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan uncritically said, "Really? Tell me more." Now everybody, oh yeah, no, we gotta, Elizabeth Warren started it, so Pocahontas, well, it must be a terrible organization, even though I know absolutely nothing about this organization that gave over $20 million back to consumers, $20 million actually. back to consumers. I know nothing about it, but it's terrible. Now, this is a little harder because people know what Social Security is. They know what Medicare is. But they've never had so many people primed to cut their own throats.
Yep.
Ever.
And by the time they figure it out, it'll be too late. It'll be too late. If you're collecting disability and you are cheering on what's going on now at Doge, it's going to be too late.
Yep.
By the time
Yep.
some 19-year-old Afrikaner pool boy decides you don't need that disability anymore, it's going to be too late. It's going to be gone.
Right.
It's going to be
Right.
gone.
Right.
And Trump doesn't have to be reelected. He's going to try and pass the ball to J.D. Vance. The Democrats are in shambles. Who is going to stop them at this point? Who is going to stop them at this point? They have tricked you into cheering for your own destruction, into cheering for your own demise. And this kind of grievance is what they use every single time. And this time, that grievance is being amplified by the very platform owned by the very man who is in a position to make these cuts. How you do not see this as a clear and present danger to your own well-being is beyond me. Unless you're fucking rich. If you're rich, I understand it. Sure. If you're a working person, you have to be incredibly self-destructive to cheer this on. Incredibly self-destructive. This is obviously the Holy Grail. This is obviously what they wanted to do all along. For almost 100 years at this point. For almost 100 years at this point. Elon Musk's political hero is not Donald Trump. It is Javier Milei. What's the poverty rate in Argentina now? 53%. He idolizes the man. That is what they intend on doing here. These people mean you harm, severe harm. And to see people just propagandize to the point where they can cheer this on, it is pathetic. It is really pathetic. I mean, this country is done. It's washed. That's what George Carlin said shortly before he died. The country is finished. It's over. And it is. It is. There's no pulling back from the brink. You know, there is no majoritarian solution to this through the democratic system at this point. You know, you can make wins with an organized workforce, just like the dock workers did. You know, Trump gave them the win on the AI because he felt he had to, right? They need a system to preside over.
Well,
the only way to do this is to shut the whole thing down.
That's it.
Shut the whole thing down. That's it. You have no other choice in this moment. You know, I was talking with a friend of ours who we've had on the show many times, who was talking about, liberal constitutionalism. If you're going to be on the right side of history at this moment, that's what you have to advocate for. And I said that and that alone is a non-starter. That's what the whole...
That's how we got here.
That's what this whole past decade has really proven. That the Democrats ran on maintaining liberal constitutionalism for its own sake. And what did people do? They traded that in the hope of getting something to eat, as FDR said in the clip we played last time. So that ship has sailed. That ship has sailed. But it is so mind-boggling to me that people are this submissive to these people. It has always been, since I was a kid, I didn't understand it. Since I was a kid. Don't you watch, when you're a kid and you watch a cartoon or a movie or something, the rich, greedy prick is always the bad guy in the movie.
Not anymore.
Right. The rich, greedy prick is always the bad guy. Or what? You lost sight of that? What? You got convinced into thinking, no, they're the good guys. They mean you well. And it's the beggar who's the bad guy. It's the poor person who's the bad guy. I mean, it just requires, such a perversion of your understanding of the world and of like the human experience. I mean, it is really a pathetic thing to see, and now we're seeing it in overdrive.
It's a society of very broken people.
Yes.
In the end, what Trump is doing, there's a wing of the oligarchy that doesn't like the way they're going about it. They don't like the aesthetics of it. But in the end, they'll take it over social democratic reforms. In the end, is what they're about. Now, you want to see how neoliberalism primed people for this. Going back to what you're saying, the rich person's the bad guy. Not anymore. When I used to do my tours of Central Park, we stopped by the Dakota where John Lennon was shot. And I always made the point, one of the reasons John Lennon is dead is because he didn't have bodyguards. He didn't have bodyguards because he felt it was classist. He felt it was pompous to walk around with bodyguards. Today, you got a show like Entourage, but it's not on the air anymore, but that celebrates it. What if you tried to put a show like that on the air in like 1972? Everybody would be like, this guy's an asshole. This guy's, I hope something bad happens to this guy. The idea that you would have shows that celebrate people like that celebrate that kind of opulence. Now, you could say there was a hypocrisy of these very wealthy rock stars who drove around in Rolls Royces pretending to be of the people, but that's a different question. It shows you something about where people's minds were at, what their expectations were. When I was growing up, you had TV series that celebrated union leaders. Carl Malden was in a show called Skag. Norma Ray was a hit at the movies. It's people have been conditioned largely or partially through the liberal value system to celebrate wealth and to delegate the expression of leftism to lifestyle brand choices, aligning yourself with certain boutique causes, with certain aesthetic expressions. But the celebration of untrammeled wealth has been pushed by the elites of our society, and one wing of that elites eventually wound up losing to the other, but they did more to prime people for celebrating people like Elon than Elon has.
To drain the swamp, including a buyout offer to the entire workforce of the Central Intelligence Agency, now temporarily blocked by a judge, the firing of 17 or 18 inspectors general and federal prosecutors, the halting of government funding and grants, sees them cannibalize the Leviathan they worship. They plan to dismantle the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Education, and the U.S. Postal Service, part of the internal machinery of the empire. The more dysfunctional the state becomes, the more it creates a business opportunity for predatory corporations and private equity firms. These billionaires will make a fortune harvesting the remains of the empire. But they are ultimately slaying the beast that created American wealth and power. Once the dollar is no longer the world's reserve currency, something the dismantling of the empire guarantees, the U.S. will be unable to pay for its huge deficits by selling treasury bonds. The American economy will fall into a devastating depression. This will trigger a breakdown of civil society, soaring prices, especially for imported products, stagnant wages, and high unemployment rates. The funding of at least 750 overseas military bases and our bloated military will become impossible to sustain. The empire will instantly contract. It will become a shadow of itself. Hyper-nationalism, fueled by an inchoate rage and widespread despair, will morph into a hate-filled American fascism. The demise of the United States as the preeminent global power could come far more quickly than anyone imagines. The historian Alfred W. McCoy writes in his book, In the Shadows of the American Century, The Rise and Decline of U.S. Global Power. Despite the aura of omnipotence empires often project, most are surprisingly fragile, lacking the inherent strength of even a modest nation-state. Indeed, a glance at their history should remind us that the greatest of them are susceptible to collapse from diverse causes, with fiscal pressures usually a prime factor. For the better part of 2 centuries, the security and prosperity of the homeland has been the main objective for most stable states, making foreign or imperial adventures an expendable option, usually allocated no more than 5% of the domestic budget. Without the financing that arises almost organically inside a sovereign nation, Empires are famously predatory in their relentless hunt for plunder or profit. Witness the Atlantic slave trade, Belgium's rubber lust in the Congo, British India's opium commerce, the Third Reich's rape of Europe, or the Soviet exploitation of Eastern Europe. When revenues shrink or collapse, McCoy points out, empires become brittle. So delicate is their ecology of power that when things start to go truly wrong, empires regularly unravel with unholy speed. Just a year for Portugal, 2 years for the Soviet Union, 8 years for France, 11 years for the Ottomans, 17 for Great Britain, and, in all likelihood, just 27 years for the United States, counting from the crucial year 2003, when the U.S. invaded Iraq, he writes. The array of tools used for global dominance, wholesale surveillance, the evisceration of civil liberties, including due process, torture, militarized police, the massive prison system, militarized drones and satellites, will be employed against a restive and enraged population. The devouring of the carcass of the empire to feed the outsized greed and egos of these scavengers presages a new dark age.
Murderous truck drivers prowling the nation's highways for victims have become familiar villains, really, in TV shows and movies.
In fact, the percentage of long-haul truckers who become murderers is small. But according to the FBI, there are likely hundreds of homicidal truck drivers on our roads who have never been caught.
Many of them have driven across Nevada and have left a bloody trail behind them. Tonight, Chief Investigator George Knapp takes a deeper dive into how victims are targeted.
86-year-old Reno resident Patrick Carnes was driving in tandem with a long-haul trucker along I-80 when he vanished forever back in 2011. His car was found in the same out-of-the-way field where 62-year-old Judith Casita's vehicle was found 5 years earlier. She, too, was never seen again. Nevada lawmen came to suspect that a serial killer trucker, possibly two, were picking off victims along I-80.
And this was actually where the vehicle was.
I've seen some gruesome things in 25 years as an FBI agent, really gory crime scenes.
Former FBI Assistant Director Frank Figluzzi says the two missing Nevadans are not typical targets for serial killer truckers. Most of the known victims are younger women, either sex workers or hitchhikers. Figluzzi learned about the killers and their most likely victims by digging into a bureau program called the Highway Serial Killings Initiative, established in 2009. And learned even more by riding shotgun with truckers over thousands of miles, research that produced his best-selling book, Long Haul. By studying known murders, missing persons, and truckers themselves, the FBI estimates there could be 450 long-haul truckers who are serial killers, probably more. Many are sexual predators. Some just like to kill.
One indeed likes to control the outcome and loves the power and will prolong torture, rape, and other horrors. But the other one, George, the other kind of serial killer, simply wants to kill. He enjoys that power of life and death, and he kills quickly.
He's killing.
Truck driver Chester Todd was suspected by the FBI of multiple rapes and murders of women, but he went on the run in 1996 and didn't surface until 2011 in Las Vegas, where he'd been living under an assumed name. Another serial killer truck driver, Wayne Allen Ford, had a severed breast in his pocket when he turned himself in to California police in 1998. He admitted to 4 murders. 3 of his victims had been dismembered. The body of one victim, 26-year-old Tina Gibbs of Las Vegas, was found in Northern California, not far from Ford's home. One of the most vile of the trucker killers is Robert Ben Rhodes, who built a torture chamber in his truck. Rhodes murdered 2 couples he picked up hitchhiking, one in Utah, one in Texas, and is suspected of dozens of other murder-torture sagas.
There's some of the most heinous crimes and criminals in the book, including Robert Ben Rhodes, who picked up a 14-year-old girl hitchhiking, hooked her up from fish hooks inside his torture chamber in his rig, over the course of several weeks across many states, raped and tortured her, leaving her for dead in an abandoned farmhouse.
The most common and most vulnerable pool of victims are the so-called lot lizards, which is the crude name drivers use for the sex workers who ply their trade in the nation's truck stops. Figluzzi met and interviewed many of them for his book, including a few who survived their attacks, and knows that educating these women about the dangers is tough. Many of them have drug addictions and poor judgment, move around a lot, don't let family know where they are, so no one is likely to report them missing. Figluzzi also wrote his book to educate cops about the FBI initiative. The Nevada lawmen working on the Pat Carnes case had no idea there's an FBI database they could have accessed.
If I have one message to any law enforcement officer listening, it's get your unsolved cases, especially involving roadside killings, into the FBI's database.
Exactly, it happens all the time, and it's not just people saying it to you, it is institutionally accepted. Because let's talk about some of the insane double standards and institutionalized Islamophobia and anti-Arab racism that's happening over at some of these social media platforms. Exhibit A. Twitch is now made criticizing Zionism or using the term Zionist a part of their hateful conduct policy. This is insane. Zionism is an ideology. Like, literally, it is an ideology in the same way that being a conservative or a socialist or a libertarian or a liberal is an ideology. Twitch announced that they are categorizing the term Zionist as a potential slur as a part of their hateful content. You know what's so amazing about that? They're making an ideology a slur if you criticize it, but they allow Islamophobia like it ain't no thing on their platform. Literally, this is what I mean when I talk about the insanity of the victimhood that they're obsessed with, that Zionists are obsessed with, is that they constantly victimize themselves while bullying other people. They constantly cry about racism while being Islamophobic and racist. Like, it's amazing. Using the term Zionist to attack or demean another individual or group of people based on their background or religious belief is against our rules. Excuse me, Twitch. Zionism is not a religious belief. Does anyone see how unironically anti-Semitic it is to be using Zionist and Judaism interchangeably? As this guy pointed out, who is Jewish, by flagging Zionist as a slur, Twitch conflates Zionism with the Jewish identity, erasing dissent and diversity among Jews. This stifles criticism of a political ideology during a time in which an ethnic cleansing is being carried out in Zionism's name. Literally. So you're actually adding to anti-Semitism, unironically, by conflating Zionism with Judaism and erasing all the anti-Zionist Jews. Are they going to ban any criticism or make it hateful conduct, any criticism of conservatism or liberalism? Because that is literally what this is. And this applies to religion too. You can't give special privileges to Judaism and then allow people on your platform every single day, all day, to criticize Christianity and Islam, to demean or attack another individual or group of people on the basis of their background or religious beliefs. Okay, so I guess you guys are gonna need to purge a lot of people who shit on Christianity every day. Go look across Twitch's channels and see all the people that shit on Christianity and Islam every single day and see if they're enforcing this equally. Go through Twitch's channels and see all the creators that shit all over different ideologies, including socialism and communism and libertarianism and conservatism. And then you should ask Twitch, why does the ideology of Zionism get special privileges over other ideologies? Zionism didn't even exist 200 years ago or 150 years ago. It was literally started in the late 1800s, okay? So, like, trying to make this happen is not only anti-Semitic, because not only are you conflating Zionism with Judaism, but what you're saying is that the genocide that's happening in Gaza and the Zionist project that's being carried out by the Israeli regime committing genocide and ethnic cleansing is somehow inherently Jewish and thus needs to be protected. Insanity. Also, let's not pretend that Twitch doesn't have an Islamophobia problem already, okay? Because here they were banning a bunch of their own streamers who were Muslim because they were criticizing Zionism. They banned them. Again, happens all the time. The cry bullies come out, and then the people that they're victimizing, the actual victims, get punished for the bullies bullying. So I want you to understand, the actual institutionalized Islamophobia at places like Twitch, and we're going to get to YouTube in a second, because Twitch banned a bunch of Muslim creators for criticizing Zionism and calling them hateful. And yet, when Asmongold came on here and literally said he did not care about Palestinians being slaughtered because they had an inferior culture, which is literally genocidal racism, he got a little slap on the wrist and suspended for a week. you know what I didn't see? I didn't see Twitch making that kind of Islamophobia, hateful conduct on their platform. Weird. And at the time I said that Asmongold or anybody else should not have been banned or should not have been kicked off the platform because I'm actually principled when it comes to my beliefs in the First Amendment, unlike you guys. Not even criticism of it. But then you guys want to add a political ideology that you happen to agree with as a part of your hateful conduct to stop people from criticizing an ideological movement and from calling out the genocide that this government is carrying out. And this is all happening against the backdrop of Ethan Klein and Destiny trying to get Hassan Piker kicked off of Twitch. Why don't you just say you hate Arabs? Why don't you just come out and actually say that? It's shorter. Which, speaking of that, here's Destiny actually on YouTube, and now we're gonna move to YouTube, literally saying that.
Strategically place myself in areas where you can't hurt me. Sounds like hiding to me. Listen, as a Jew, I understand hiding quite well. It's one of our specialties. Oh, that's why you live in Brooklyn instead of Israel or whatever, huh? What is that supposed to mean? You're hiding your true calling to save your country by being an American Jew. My country? A diasporite, yes. Don't start with that. I don't like that. Anyway, but we don't have to talk about that crap. What do you think? First of all, what do you think Brooklyn is? I'm literally in the Jewish state right now. You think that? Oh, okay. You should tell Hamas so they stop attacking the wrong place. Listen, we'll do an in-person show, okay? It'll be, What does that even mean? Was that an attempt at a joke? Jeez, Louise, I didn't even notice this. Are you like in Israel? You're an Israel guy. No, I'm in Miami Beach. This is like the second. You're not Jewish, but you're Israel guy? I'm a neocon, right? Isn't that what we're supposed to be? I don't know anything, brother. I don't know anything about streams. I don't even know if I'm on the stream right now. Okay, it's not really so much I'm like an Israel guy. I just like really hate Arabs. That's like the easiest way to kind of show it. So. Was that another joke? Boy, save that for the stage. Don't forget to tip your authority.
You see how when the guy was like, you're joking, right? It was like crickets. And then he moved on and changed the subject. Amazing. He literally just said he hated Arabs. And then admitted that it's not so much that he loves the Israeli regime, he just hates the Arabs. And actually him saying that is really admitting the position of a lot of evangelical Christian lunatics who support the Israeli regime and a lot of right-wingers. It's not that they actually like the Israeli regime, they just hate Arab people. That's literally it. Because if you actually talk to a lot of evangelicals who are really pro-Israeli regime or a lot of right-wingers, they're actually anti-Semitic. Like, they don't care about Jewish people. They care about protecting the state because of biblical prophecies and, military shit. That's a long story and a whole other video. But you also notice that he also said something anti-Semitic to him by saying that he should be defending his people in his homeland when the guy is from fucking Brooklyn. It's actually anti-Semitic to just assume that somebody is Jewish, that means that they must be pro-Israeli regime. That is not true. He said that on a stream on YouTube, and that is one of the tons of insane things that he said. Tons of racist things that he said. And I still would not call for him to be demonetized or kicked off the platform. The point I'm making is the double standard here. YouTube will allow that kind of stuff to go. YouTube will allow Ethan Klein to get on here, like I talked about in my previous video, and say insane racist, anti-Arab, Islamophobic shit about Hassan on a daily.
Trump puts an appropriately ugly face on a very ugly empire. Notes from the edge of the narrative matrix. The only thing I like about Trump is exactly what so many empire managers hate about him. He gives the game away. He says the quiet parts out loud. He's the only president who will openly boast that U.S. troops are in Syria to keep the oil, or lament that they failed to take the oil from Venezuela, or just come right out and tell everyone he is bought and owned by Zionist oligarchs. Trump is the opposite of Obama, who was very skillful at putting a pretty face on the evil empire. Trump puts a very ugly face on a very ugly thing. He is a much more honest face to have on the empire. A crude, stupid plutocrat who is owned by other plutocrats is the perfect representative of that tyrannical power structure. The propaganda machine has been spinning its head off, trying to frame soccer brawls in Amsterdam as a horrific pogrom against Jewish people because the side initiating the violence were supporters of Team Maccabi Tel Aviv who flew in from Israel. Video evidence shows far-right Israeli hooligans terrorizing the streets of Amsterdam, chanting "Fuck the Arabs,"
starting fights, beating people, tearing down Palestinian flags, attacking a cab driver, and singing, "Let the IDF win and fuck the Arabs. Why is school out in Gaza? There are no children left there." In the face of all this evidence of atrocious behavior by Israeli soccer fans, the New York Times ran a story with the headline, "Anti-Semitic attacks prompt emergency flights for Israeli soccer fans." The Wall Street Journal ran with, "Anti-Semitic attacks in Amsterdam prompt tight security at Jewish sites." The Telegraph says, "Pogroms have returned to Europe, and the anti-racist left are silent." Meanwhile, the Daily Mail sports section ran with a headline more in line with what people actually saw. Israeli football hooligans tear down Palestinian flags in Amsterdam as taxi drivers fight back in night of chaos ahead of Maccabi Tel Aviv's visit to Ajax. Leaders of Western nations like the US, UK, Canada, and France joined the Dutch king in framing these soccer brawls and hooliganism as historic mass-scale hate crimes against Jews, while Israeli officials have been melodramatically shrieking like their hair is on fire. These exhausting, victim-larping freaks. Stop playing sports with Israel. Stop holding sporting events which could lead to the deranged members of a genocidal apartheid state showing up in your community, stirring up violence and hate so they can cry victim and say you Holocausted them. Another thing that sucks about the fake anti-Semitism crisis that the Western political media class are pretending to believe in is that it will probably become a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy which creates real hatred of Jewish people. You can't keep telling everyone over and over and over again that Jews and Israel are one and the same, and that any criticism of one is always necessarily an attack on the other, while the state of Israel is murdering children by the tens of thousands, without contributing to unfair prejudice against Jewish people everywhere. Israel is exacerbating this effect by insisting its actions represent all Jews and are done in defense of Judaism, while committing genocidal atrocities under a Star of David flag. If you understand the truth that modern Israel is a settler colonialist project of the Western Empire which uses the Jewish religion as an excuse to inflict violence and tyranny in a crucial geostrategic region, then you understand that there is no real connection between modern Israel and the Jews you encounter in your community. Sure, a majority of Western Jews buy into the empire's lies and support Israel, but a majority of the Westerners of all faiths buy into the empire's lies about its wars and official enemies, and all its other propaganda, too. This is just what it looks like when you live in a highly propagandized society, which is structured to psychologically manipulate people into consenting to non-stop military violence. Once you understand this, you see that blaming ordinary Jews in your society for the actions of the State of Israel makes about as much sense as blaming ordinary Muslims for the actions of the Saudi royals. But most people don't understand this. It takes a lot of learning and close examination, and most people haven't reached that level of lucidity in our confusing information landscape, which is distorted by lies and propaganda. So when they see a self-evidently evil thing being done, and hear their leaders and pundits telling them over and over again that if you hate what you are seeing, then you necessarily hate Jewish people, what understanding do you think they are going to form in their minds? Greater hatred and prejudice looks like a fairly inevitable consequence of this messaging from where I'm sitting. And it will all be the fault of the Western pundits and politicians who are aggressively promulgating this message throughout our society right now in an effort to stomp out criticism of an active genocide. Tweet from political analyst Sherry Jacobus. Netanyahu bombs and obliterates a school in Gaza. He did this because we just elected Trump, who told him to finish it off, and this is what he meant. To the Arab voters in Michigan who voted for Trump, this is on you. Comment from Caitlin. This tweet is awesome because this person clearly believes this is the very first time this has happened. She literally just began paying attention to Gaza airstrikes because Trump won. She's been completely uninterested the entire time Biden was backing this shit. The garment-rending emotional reaction to the US election results, compared to the apathy on Gaza over the last year, tells you that liberals don't see Palestinians as human beings. They'll deny it, but it's true. Their emotions show you much more than their words ever will. This is who they are. Ignore their words and watch their actions. It works with politicians, it works with entire governments, and it works with individuals too. If you see someone flailing around on the ground because their genocidal candidate lost after spending a year walking around functioning perfectly fine throughout a year of genocide, that tells you something about them that their words would never tell you. People are always much more honest with their actions than their words, because their words can spin narratives and actions cannot. If you're ever unsure about someone's true motivations and where they really stand, don't ask them, just watch them. They'll tell you eventually, with their actions and not their words.
Another psychopath for U.S. Secretary of State. Notes from the edge of the narrative matrix. Marco Rubio will be joining a long list of psychopaths as the next U.S. Secretary of State. A few of Trump's cabinet picks might have a hard time getting past the Senate, but not Rubio. He's the exact type of blood-guzzling swamp leech those creatures on Capitol Hill adore. Psychopathy is almost a job requirement for Secretary of State, because the title entails a responsibility for helping to roll out the violence and tyranny which serves as the glue that holds the U.S. empire together. As Secretary of State, you are responsible for whipping up international consensus for brutal economic sanctions regimes, drumming up support for heightened aggressions against the official enemies of Washington, and making up excuses for the criminal abuses of the U.S. and its allies. This is funny in a dark sort of way, because the Secretary of State is supposed to be in charge of U.S. diplomacy, which in theory should mean making peace and resolving conflicts without violence. The U.S. Department of State was supposed to be the peacemaking counterbalance to the U.S. Department of War, renamed the Department of Defense in 1947 because Department of War was a little too honest. But because the U.S. runs a globe-spanning empire that is held together by endless violence, it has little use for peacekeeping. So the State Department mostly just gets used to help inflict more violence and abuse. In theory, it was supposed to be the Peace Department, but in practice, the U.S. just got 2 War Departments. Rubio will be a suitable addition to the list of sadistic manipulators who have served in that role before him, joining the likes of Antony Blinken, Mike Pompeo, Hillary Clinton, Madeleine Albright, and Henry Kissinger.
Why don't you now tell them that the US military are not welcome in Shannon Airport while they are arming a genocide to commit these atrocities? The images of people burning alive at Alaska Hospital and in a tent camp beside that hospital are possibly the most horrific, stomach-churning, terrifying images of this horrific year of genocide by Israel against the people of Gaza. I suspect those images will probably be the lasting image in people's minds of the utter horror that Israel is inflicting, burning people alive in hospitals, in ICU beds, in tents, innocent people, like Shaban al-Dalou, like a falafel seller, a janitor, burning them alive. There's simply no atrocity Israel isn't willing to commit, and we're seeing this in front of our eyes.